Perfect. So today we are going to see how you can create your own MCP server secured with open authorization in case you want to rely on security, which should be the case, generally speaking. I'm Paolo Pialorsi, and I'm a senior developer advocate in the fields of Microsoft 365 extensibility. So let's have a quick overview of what is MCP and why we need to have, or we would like to have, an MCP server of our own. So MCP is basically covered everywhere nowadays. It is Model Context Protocol, and it is a protocol that we use to connect agents with external tools and functionalities to add actions and advanced capabilities to our agents. And we usually used to say that MCP is almost like a universal plug, because you can plug MCP servers into your AI solutions and use them as you do when you plug a device inside your USB port of your smartphone or tablet or stuff like that. And they really help you quickly and easily develop solutions which can rely on external data sources, functionalities, and capabilities. Now, why should we care about creating an MCP server? Well, out there are plenty of MCP servers provided by Microsoft itself or by third parties, partners, and companies. But it might be the case that you are an ISV or a company willing to consume your own data, your own functionalities, and providing your own actions to the agents that you create and that you use to extend Microsoft 365 Copilot. So if that is the case and you want to provide your own tools, resources, and prompts, because those are the functionalities that you provide through an MCP server. Tools are actions, resources are data, and prompts are prompts that help the AI model to work on those tools and resources. And if that is the case, and if you want to consume your own tools, resources, and data, for example, because you want to integrate your AI solution into a line of business system of your own, well, that's a good reason why you might want to create your own MCP server. And if that is the case, you can rely on a set of available SDKs. So as you can see here, we have, if I'm counting it correctly, 10 different SDKs for 10 different development frameworks or languages. You can go from TypeScript to Python to C#, Ruby, and so on and so forth. Plenty of options. So you are not forced to be in a specific development framework, but based on what is your context and based on what is your knowledge, your personal knowledge. I'm not talking now about the knowledge of your AI model, but your own personal knowledge. You can pick and choose the SDK you like and you want to use. For example, in the sample that I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to use C#, but that's just one of the options we have. You can also think about creating an MCP server using a specific MCP binding that we provide for Azure Functions. So if you already have an Azure function and you want to make it available also as an MCP server, instead of rewriting from scratch the whole solution, you can add that specific binding. There are some constraints here and there, but you will be able to make your Azure functions available as MCP tools in a very quick and easy way. And of course, you can always go the low-level way and implement your own MCP server at low level, implementing the protocol. I wouldn't go that direction nowadays, since we have the SDK, which is way easier to use than reinventing the wheel, let me put it this way. And of course, when you provide a service, when you provide capabilities to other systems, and now we're talking about external agents, and you want to use agents to consume your MCP server, you should also carefully think about the security of your data. And that's why today we are not simply covering how to create an MCP server, but also how to secure that MCP server with open authorization. As you can see, we have different options. We can make the MCP servers available as anonymous servers. Could be an option if you are not providing any sensitive data. You can protect your MCP server with API keys. That's another option. But if you want to have a stronger solution and a more enterprise-ready solution, I would definitely go for the open authorization model. And specifically, when it comes to a solution in the context of Microsoft 365, as you will see in the demo, I would use Entra ID and open authorization through Entra ID. On the wire, at a wire level, if you think about securing your MCP server, you can rely on HTTP plus the security protocol that you want to use, for example, open authorization. And there are different options about how you can make available to the consumer of your MCP server the security settings of your server. So you can provide support for protocols like the protected resource metadata discovery, which allows the consumer, so the agent consuming your MCP server, to understand the security settings of your server, doing a discovery on the fly. You can use the dynamic client registration if you want to dynamically create and register a client to consume securely your server. And you can also provide manual settings, which is, for example, the option we're going to use in this demo when consuming the MCP server with Copilot Studio. No matter what, once you are done with the handshake, you will have an access token, and you will have to provide the access token in the authorization header, as you would do with any other REST API that you are going to consume in a secure way using open authorization. And as I said, you can, and we will do so, you can rely on Entra ID for open authorization security in your scenario. So now, talking about how you can practically create your own MCP server with .NET, my personal advice is to, first of all, install a project template for .NET if your target is .NET and C#, because nowadays, as Microsoft, we provide a project template for that, so that you can very easily start from this template and have a ready-to-go MCP server. You simply need to provide your own business logic, your own custom data, and by using this template, you create a project. You can create or vibe code, because nowadays that's an option as well, indeed. You can vibe code your tools, resources, and prompts. And behind the scenes, the project created from the template will rely on the Model Context Protocol SDK for .NET. Then, if you want to have security in place, since the project will be simply an ASP.NET solution hosting your MCP server through the ASP.NET request pipeline, you can simply plug in the security of ASP.NET. You can use the authentication and authorization of Entra ID. Plus, if you want to have the dynamic discovery of your MCP server, you can add through an extension method still provided by the SDK and by the infrastructure of the project template, you can add the support for MCP discovery, as I will show you shortly in the demo. Actually, now in the demo. So let's switch to the demo desktop here, and let's start having a look at the solution that I'm talking about. So this is the entry page for the SDKs available in the Modeled Context Protocol repository and site. So you see here, we are not under Microsoft, we are under modelcontextprotocol.io. And here you have all of the SDKs available. You can go into the GitHub repo of each of them and see how they work and how you can use them, okay? Then, as I was telling you, you can rely on a minimal template that we provide, which is available for Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or you can also use it from the command line. Today, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. And what I'm going to share with you is a sample that you can find on the community sample gallery. Right after the end of my demo, I will share with you all of the links. This is a sample that you can download from the sample gallery, and it is a ready-to-go solution to play with an hypothetical list of customers that you can access through an hypothetical line of business system to get the list of customers, to add, update, or delete, or get specific customers. So this is, I think, really useful for you to play with and to dig into. So now let me, first of all, switch to Visual Studio Code, and let's start creating an MCP server using the project template. So in Visual Studio Code, I can simply activate the command palette. I can say that I want to create a new project. And of course, I already installed the template in my environment. I can search for the MCP server app. And by doing so, I will have to choose a folder where I want to store my generated MCP server, which could be a new folder right here, MCP for community. This is a nice name. Okay, I will store my template here. MCP server 1 is definitely a perfect name for a random and fake MCP server that I'm going to create right now. And I'm going to create the project, or I can even configure a bunch of settings like what kind of protocols I want to use, the local or the HTTP and stuff like that. Let's create the project. As you can see right now, I have a README file to let me understand what's going on. And I have a program.cs file with a very minimal and basic implementation to have the hosting of my solution and to have the MCP server available through the builder services of my application. And then in the tools subfolder, I have a sample tool. And here you can see I have a function with an attribute MCP server tool. This attribute comes from the SDK of Model Context Protocol. And in fact, you see I have the using of Model Context Protocol.server. And here I have the implementation of this sample tool that I'm going to use. Now, of course, in the solution I'm going to show you, I have a close to real scenario. So let me actually switch to the other implementation that I have. So this one, and in this one, I have quite some stuff in the program CS because I have all of the security and I commented out everything together with my best friend GitHub Copilot. And I have a set of tools to handle all of the functionalities, like, for example, to get, let me go to the top, to get the list of customers, to get a specific customer by ID and stuff like that. But to better understand how this MCP server works, let me go to the MCP inspector tool so that we can see how it works. And here we go. Here is my server running locally on localhost. I can connect to my server. And by connecting to my server, I can list the tools available. And in the list of tools, I have the list of customers. I can run this tool and I can see what the list of customer is. I can get a specific customer. So for example, if I can get rid of this, okay, let me copy and get a specific customer by ID. And we can do stuff like that. Okay, so from an agent perspective, we will be able to rely on these tools to provide advanced functionalities to our users. Now, from an implementation perspective, this is really easy and simple because without thinking about the security so far, but we will come to the security shortly, we simply have the builder, which has been created right here. And we have, let me scroll down, the fact that we add the MCP capability to our server. So by mapping MCP with specific settings, we simply make our MCP server available, and all of the tools that we defined with the MCP server tool attribute will become available through the MCP server interface. In fact, I have my get customer by ID, and in the MCP inspector, I have get underscore customer underscore by underscore ID. I have the description that I provided here, returns a single customer by ID, and here is what I see in the description, which is what will actually become available to the agent and to the LLM, which will evaluate through the orchestrator if it is useful to use that specific tool or not. Okay. So now, when it comes to security, I made this implementation so that you can simply switch the security on through this flag. Let me enable security and let me run the solution again. Now, from a security perspective, in Entra ID, I configured a couple of applications. One is the one for the server, for the actual MCP server, is this one. And in this application, I configured an Entra ID app. And in the Explosion API section, I configured that I have a specific permission scope with the name customers.readwrite.all. I did my best to mimic the same syntax we use internally in Microsoft Graph to name the permission scopes. This is a permission scope that will be needed to being able to consume my MCP server in a secure way. As such, I also have a consumer application that I registered in Entra. And in this application, I have in the API permission section, I have the permission for customers.readwrite.all delegated permissions consented and granted to this application, plus other permissions for Microsoft Graph that I will use to consume this MCP server in through this client in Copilot Studio. I also configured a client secret for this application to do the dance of the open authorization token retrieval. And I've configured in the authentication all of the endpoints that I'm going to use to actually get an access token through a web application or a single page application. And as such, for example, I have this tool called Bruno, where I configured the endpoints of Entra ID, the authorization URL and the token URL. I provided the client ID of my client application and my consumer application in Entra ID, as well as the secret. I configured that I want to retrieve an access token for this specific permission scope, which is the one defined in my server. And as such, then I can simply retrieve an access token, and I can show you that the access token gives me in its content. Let me go back here inside the jot.ms tool. I can see that I have a token for that specific audience, which is the MCP server, and I have the customers.readWrite_all permission, which means that now, from an HTTP level perspective, I can make a request to that specific server, and I can get back information. Like, for example, I can initialize the MCP session, I can list the tools and stuff like that. Okay, how does it work again? Back to the actual implementation, and then we are going to consume it from Copilot Studio. In my server, starting from the top, I create with the builder, create builder, we create the builder. We get if the security is enabled or not. If that is enabled, I simply use the syntax that we used to use in any ASP.NET application to enable the Web API authentication, which will rely on a configuration, which is the one we have in our app settings file with the instance of Entra, the domain, the tenant, and the client ID of the server application. Then we get other settings. Let me scroll down a bit. We add support for course, doesn't really matter now. We have in the add authentication section, we also add the MCP authentication, which means that we can have a static configuration of all of the MCP settings so that when we query the MCP server to dynamically get the configuration, we can get them, or we can make it dynamic, which is my option right now, because in this scenario, I'm making this MCP server available through localhost when I'm using it locally, but I'm also making it available through a dev tunnel to make it accessible from public services like, for example, Microsoft Copilot and Copilot Studio. So whenever I go to the browser and I make a request for the well-known OAuth protected resource URL, which is a special URL for discovery of security settings, I can get back a JSON file with all of the information about where my server is available, what are the authorization servers, that I want to have an authentication header, and that is the scope that I want to find in the access token that I will get in order to provide my functionalities. And we get the same response from the public URL, and that's why I'm using the dynamic discovery inside my code, because I can switch between the localhost and the public URL of my server. Okay. Then I do the regular authorization settings, and I configure a policy which requires to have the claim with the permission scope I'm looking for. So if any access token will come without the specific permission scope, the request will fail because it will not be authorized. And then I simply configure my MCP server right here, and the MCP server will start processing authentication and authorization as any other ASP.NET application. And that's so true that in the last couple of minutes of this demo, if I go back to my browser, I can show you that here I have Visual Studio Code, Copilot Studio. And in Copilot Studio, I have an agent that I already created for the sake of saving some time. And in this agent, I have an MCP server configured, which is the customer's MCP server. So if I select this item, we can see that in the list of tools, come on, we have our tools. But we can also see, if we go to the settings of our platform environment, that we have a connector backing this MCP server. Here it is. And if we go to the settings and we go to security, we can see that it is configured to use Entra ID. with a specific client ID and client secret, and it is looking for the customers.readWrite.all permission scope plus other permission scopes. So that when I will do list all the customers prompt inside my agent, this prompt will trigger my MCP server. And I will be able, of course, I need to allow consuming this MCP server. I will be able to retrieve the list of customers. And of course, first of all, I will need to connect to my target MCP server with a valid connection. So right now, let me refresh my connection, and I will then be able to make the actual request. Okay, we are connected, and I can retry my request. And now you will see I'm consuming the customer MCP server. And now it is using the list customer tool to retrieve the whole list of customers and to show me the output. And here you see, and to show me the output in the response that I will get back from the agent. It is interesting to notice that if I go back to Visual Studio Code in the terminal, we can see that we have got a request for the list customers, and we have got a request from my user account in the tenant where I am. And I can even see, for the sake of teaching you how it works, that I have the access token. Of course, in a real solution, you shouldn't do that. But I can see the access token, and I can see that this is the access token defining my security context as a user of this tenant. So I can consume Copilot Studio, and as such from Microsoft 365 Copilot, a custom MCP server that I created with .NET Framework, with security in place, with Entra and open authorization, which is, I think, really cool and powerful. That said, few useful links. I'm going to paste them also in the chat, and that's all for me as well.